Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Good morning, Dr. Cornel, Resident UN Coordinator, Ms. Tonian Broadbow, Representative UN Women Caribbean, Dr. Tresan Kramer from the Commonwealth Secretariat, member of Mrs. Alison Anderson McLean's family, Mr. Solomon Cocking. Thank you so much for joining. Other members of her family and friends, I see Ms. Paulette Williams, students, colleagues, friends, everyone, good morning. We're gathered here today. Good morning, students, for Introduction to International Relations. This is your class, and thank you so much for allowing us to host this event here. We're gathered today in this class, Introduction to IR Gov 1008 as you know it, GT 12A as it used to be, taught by the late Alison Anderson McLean, Order of Distinction, Jamaica. Former lecturer of International Relations in the Faculty of Social Sciences, former permanent secretary in the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sports, former head of the Child Development Agency, and former head of the UN Women Multi-Caribbean Office in Bridgetown, Barbados. Thank you for joining us today as we launch the UN Women Alison Anderson McLean Internship Program. Just as we're in the aftermath of celebrating International Women's Day, celebrating women in leadership, and during our year-long celebration of the Faculty of Social Sciences 60th anniversary. I welcome you on behalf of our Dean, Professor David Tennant, and the head of the Department of Government, Dr. Suzette Horton, who is also here with us. Mrs. Alison Anderson McLean joined the Faculty of Social Sciences in 1979 as a student and graduated at the top of her class in the then fledgling International Relations program. On campus, she was a leader in Taylor Hall, serving as a communications executive on the Taylor Hall Council in 1980 to 81. I am reliably told by one Ras Bass, as she called him, that she was also demonstrating her artistic side as a member of a singing group called Jawin and the Sam Connection, which took part in the Carnival Song Contest in 1981. We would not be doing Mrs. Alison Anderson McLean justice if we did not include her artistic and creative abilities as part of her profile. Following her graduation from the University of the West Indies, Alison proceeded to Trinity Hall, University of Cambridge in 1982. There, she took the MPhil degree in International Relations, which was then offered by the Faculty of History. Alison then joined the Faculty of Social Sciences in the Department of Government as a lecturer in International Relations. During this period, she also undertook advanced studies at the London School of Economics and Political Science, a school associated, of course, with Michael Manley and other Caribbean leaders. Alison's academic interest in the Faculty of Social Sciences saw her teaching a wide range of courses, including this one, Introduction to International Relations, International Law, Theories and Approaches of International Relations, Foreign Policy, and so on. She was also instrumental in organizing and guiding students in the flagship course, International Negotiations, also offered by the Department of Government. Her commitment to her teaching responsibilities will be long remembered. Indeed, it was Alison who gave me my first opportunity as a teaching assistant to substitute for her in one of her classes in this very course way back in 1990 something. On the right-hand side, Alison's article on the global political agenda in the 1990s, A View from the Caribbean, in the book Rethinking Development, edited by Judith Wedderburn, is a model of precision and analytical power, still valuable to students and scholars alike. Alison also mentored students and chaperoned students in a number of Organization of American States and other organization model assemblies. As one of Alison's many former students, I am proud to be part of this launch. The Faculty of Social Sciences and the Department of Government thank the UN and the UN Women Caribbean for your vision and dedication and generosity in funding these internships. And I will share just parts of the eligibility. So we have kindly benefited from an MOU between the UN Entity for Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment with the University of the West Indies through our faculty, the Faculty of Social Sciences. This MOU will allow 1 or 2 students from the Department of Government and the Faculty of Social Sciences to participate in an internship program between 2 and 6 months. Candidates to be eligible must be enrolled in a postgraduate degree program or be in their final academic year of a first university degree program. You may also have recently graduated, but you must start the internship within 1 year of graduation. We will be having a call for applicants later this month where more information will be given and the selection process will start. As for the order of our program, we will shortly have some opening remarks from Dr. Gary Conneal, the UN Resident Coordinator. This will be followed by our panel discussion on involving Dr. Tressan Kramer and Miss Tanya Broadbow, former students of Mrs. Alison Anderson McLean, and I really look forward to today's proceedings. We will also have a time for question and answers, so you may direct your questions, students, guests, and everyone to the chat, and I will direct them to all our panelists. I now invite Dr. Gary Conneal, UN Resident Coordinator. He brings more than 20 years of experience to his position prior to his appointment as UN Resident Coordinator to Jamaica students. This is the highest ranking UN official in Jamaica and other Caribbean countries. Prior to his appointment, he served as a resident coordinator in Burundi, which I'll be asking you to find on a map in our next class, from 2017 to 2020. And before that, as Under Secretary General for Programs and Operations within the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies from 2015 to 2017. He was also Regional Director for the African region at the UN Office for Project Services from 2014 to 2015, having previously led the UNDP Millennium Development Goals Support Unit between 2000 and 2010. So that's a very long and distinguished career within the UN system. In 2011, Mr. Conneal was nominated Prime Minister of our sister country, Haiti, a position in which he served until 2012. He then became Senior Advisor to Liberia's President, and in her role as UN's high-level panel of eminent persons on the post-2015 development agenda. Liberia's president then, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Mr. Conneal began his career with the organization in Haiti at the UN Population Fund, the UNFPA, in 1999. He holds a medical degree from the Faculty of Medicine. So IR students, as we say, holding a degree in international relations is not your only path to a career in international relations. So he holds a medical degree from the Faculty of Medicine and Pharmacy at the State University of Haiti and a Master of Public Health from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in the US. Thank you for joining us, sir. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vassiani, for this very generous introduction. It's such a privilege to be here. And maybe before I start, let me first recognize Ms. Tani Broadber, who is our representative UN Women for the Multi-Country Office covering the whole Caribbean. Let me also thank you again for your introductory remarks and your presentation of Alison. Let me also recognize Mrs. Tressa-Ann Kramer, advisor and head of Good Offices for Peace at the Commonwealth Secretariat. And let me thank and recognize my UN colleagues and development partners, friends, and let me also address a special welcome to you all as we together today launch the Alison Anderson McLean Internship with the Department of Government in the Faculty of Social Sciences. Now, today's workshop, Caribbean Women's Mentorship and Leadership in International Relationships, in international relations, features some of the astounding women who have benefited from the tutelage of Alison McLean. What a solemn yet sustainably brilliant way to commemorate the life and service of our former UN Women representative and colleague. Now, I did not meet Alison personally, but as a new RC in Jamaica, I have felt and often still feel the positive impact of the relationships and networks Alison built and the legacy she left behind. Almost a year to the day, Alison was here with us launching the Spotlight Initiative in Jamaica. This, of course, after her leadership helped to secure the near $20 million US dollars needed to implement programs, legislations, and initiatives to help end the epidemic of family violence in Jamaica and the wider Caribbean. Now, the Spotlight Initiative will impact over 2 million beneficiaries over its 3-year life. This type of life-changing work is emblematic of the legacy that Alison left at the United Nations. At her passing, my UN country team gave Alison's family, her friends, and the community the assurance that we would continue her legacy of defending and empowering women and girls, building their capacity, and protecting our most vulnerable citizens. And today, we take another step forward in keeping that commitment. And I wish to really thank Tani Broadber at UN Women, and of course the University of West Indies, and all the partners in this initiative for keeping this very important promise alive. You know, the United Nations is fortunate to have had an international civil servant like Alison. I really hope this internship will inspire many more to take a similar path in service to the goal of gender equality. Well done, team. I wish you a fruitful discussion and comforting reflections. I am celebrating Women's Day every day this month. So let me take this opportunity to wish you all a happy Women's Day. And on behalf of the entire UN Country team, thank you and welcome. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining, and thank you for your warm greetings. So you see, students and everyone else here, we do have men involved in supporting International Women's Day. I know last week some of our male students said, "What's in it for me? Why am I must come?" So I hope you stick around for the discussion to see why uh, this is relevant for all of us. Thank you so much, Gary, for joining us and bringing things. So now I take pleasure in inviting Tanya Broadville, who is the representative of the UN Women Multi-Country Office for the Caribbean. Prior to her appointment in August 2020, Ms. Broadville served as Deputy Representative from 2015 to 2020 in the Multi-Caribbean Office, in the Multicultural Caribbean Office. Prior to this, she was team leader for the Advancing Gender Justice in the Pacific program with the UN Women Fiji Multicultural Office. Ms. Broadbent served as well as the gender specialist for the UNDP in South Africa, as well as briefly with the UN Women South Africa Multi-Country Office, and established what is now the UN Women Country Office in Haiti. Ms. Broadbent's work experience also includes lecturing in international relations and development studies at Yanshan University in China, and directing and co-producing a film on Haiti. Ms. Broadbell, I proudly say, received her first degree from the University of the West Indies Mona campus, right here with us. She also has a postgraduate degrees in development studies and business administration from the London School of Economics and the ESAD Business School in Barcelona. Let's also note that Ms. Broadwell is raising 2 sons with her husband. Thank you so much, Tony, for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vassiani. Good morning, Dr. Gary Conneal, the resident coordinator for Jamaica, Turks and Caicos Islands, Bahamas, and Cayman Islands. Thank you so much, Gary, for your warm and kind words this morning. Also, Dr. Suzette Horton, Head, Department of Government, thank you so much for all of the work that was done to ensure that we were able to come together for a scholarship and a partnership with the Department of Government and the Faculty of Social Sciences that goes more than this internship. Dr. Lisa Taylor Vassiani, my favorite tutor from those days at UE, and co-coordinator of this event, and of course, Dr. Tressan Kramer. I see many fantastic people online from Alison's family and friends who were with the Department of Government, many who aren't, but who are in school with her, and Friends for Life, as well as Professor Lewis. I see Professor Leah Riney, and many other fantastic human beings who helped to guide all of our knowledge. Now, I spoke to myself, I spoke to Tressan, I spoke to Lisa about the importance of my maintaining myself this morning. As Gary said, earlier this week was International Women's Day, and we focused specifically on women in decision-making and the importance of leadership, especially as it pertains to recovering from COVID-19. Alison Anderson McLean was this in action, not only demonstrating leadership in academia at the personal level, but also at the professional level, but also in her own country, as well as serving her region and the world. I first met Alison in GT 11A, and what she taught us was an understanding of how realism, idealism, constructivism, many of the things you all would have been discussing earlier this year, as well as an understanding of human rights, to take it from the theoretical, that we must understand the theoretical, but then apply it to what we see happening in the news, what we see happening in our communities, and what we see happening more broadly in the world. Alison was also someone who demonstrated what the research now shows around women's leadership in terms of outcomes around COVID-19. Research has been done on 192 countries to see, is there a difference? And it's not that men aren't good leaders. It is important that men are here to hear what we're talking about, because we don't exist in a world by ourselves. It's that because of women's experiences and their approaches to risk, some of the outcomes thus far that we've been seeing that are positive to COVID-19 are in majority women-led countries. One, this is because sometimes women hold themselves to a much tougher standard than their counterparts. This is, again, not anecdotal. This is from research. And secondly, because the world also holds women to a different standard. Now in class, I can tell you, you may think you were good, but Alison made sure you knew that these were the ways you could be great. I remember distinctly a negotiations class, making a speech, and Alison asked all of the class, because we had to represent different countries. And Alison asked all of the class, how did you think everybody did? And I have always had the gift of gab. My colleague said Tawny was excellent. And Alison said, yes, but do you remember what she said? And it was something that stayed with me, because you could be charismatic and say things wonderfully, but if what you say is not substantive, how is that going to serve your community and your world? And that's something that took me into my master's degree. I went into a communications class and I quoted Alison to say, this is why I need to make sure that I know not only how to be engaging, but to communicate concepts effectively. Alison was also not someone who believed in giving easy A's. I am proud to say I got a first class honors degree from UWI, and it was hard. It was very hard, because she made sure we knew what needed to be done to achieve it. You could always be better. And I can tell you, as my boss, she did the same. She made sure that each and every one of us who worked for UN Women were clear why we worked for the organization, how we were going to serve the people of the Caribbean, and not just in some kind of a theoretical lens, but how could people feel what we're doing? And then she would always let us know we could do even more to deliver. So I'm really pleased to be here today to share some of the ways in which what she has taught us, not only at UN Women, but many of us who are in international relations, what it means to say you're doing programs on ending violence against women and girls. As Gary said, Alison was the key player in making sure that we got the funding that was required for the EU-UN Spotlight Initiative in Jamaica. And what she made sure was that that program was directly aligned to the NSAP GBV, the National Strategic Action Plan on Gender-Based Violence in Jamaica, so that people know it's not just a program that has a lot of funding, but it's a program that has return on investment for Jamaican women and girls and their families. So I think I'm going to stop there, and I know there will be other questions that you'll have as well, Lisa, Dr. Vasiani, sorry, and
Lisa is good, Tony. Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Broadbow. You have no one who knew Alison can forget her voice. So beyond that shrill voice that one could hear half a mile or 10 miles away, was also the solid skills of communication and engagement. I am glad you mentioned the nexus between theories. Our students have been learning about realism and power politics. They have also been learning about liberalism and why we cooperate, what's the role of the United Nations in maintaining international peace. We have also been looking at what are some of the ways that we need to reform the UN. And some of those reforms include gender equity. And we have looked at those issues. So I'm glad you've highlighted some of those issues about the importance of linking theories to actual life. I believe you'd agree with me that Alison has also been the epitome of reinventing oneself, of not saying, oh, I'm an international relations lecturer and that's it for life, but also showing what it is to be a lifelong learner, of making the transition into other areas because she was in academia, in policy making, and within what many would consider to be the one's dream career, being with the United Nations. So now I would like to introduce Dr. Tresan Kremer, another former student of the Department of Government and of Alison Anderson McLean. Dr. Kremer is head of Good Offices for Peace and political advisor for the Caribbean at the Commonwealth Secretariat. Students, you would also remember what the Commonwealth is and how we've discussed the differences between why do we call one person an ambassador and why do we call another a high commissioner. Dr. Kremer is also the Assistant Conference Secretary for the biennial Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. As head of Good Offices for Peace, she provides advisory and technical expertise to enhance the impact of the Commonwealth's conflict prevention engagements and develop and deploy programs that effectively respond to and manage political disputes. Dr. Kremer has led and supported fact-finding and confidence-building political missions in Lesotho, Fiji, Guyana, Mozambique, and Zambia, to name a few. She has also managed over 16 election observation missions in different Commonwealth countries. You should be able to say how many countries are in the Commonwealth. We have mid-semesters coming up. Dr. Kremer also leads the Commonwealth Secretariat's Enhancing Women's Political Leadership and Dialogue program, which supports political parties and election management bodies to encourage and foster women's political leadership and strengthen the capacity of election management bodies and political parties to support increased women's political leadership and participation. She's also a mediator and a conflict resolution expert who gained extensive experience with Amnesty International's Crisis and Conflict Management Unit. Dr. Kremer has lived and worked in Israel and Bosnia-Herzegovina and led research on transnational crime and the criminal justice system in the UK and in African and Caribbean regions. She was also a project manager with a leading UK youth and conflict management NGO. We just finished studying different types of actors in the international system, whether they're states, whether they're intergovernmental organizations, or NGOs. So here we have an example of the LEAP confronting conflict. Dr. Kremer has previously lectured in criminal justice and social policy at the University of Kent and the University of Greenwich. She holds a PhD in criminology from the University of Kent, a Master's of Arts in Diplomatic Studies from the University of Westminster, and an undergraduate degree in International Relations and Sociology from University of the West Indies in our faculty. She's also raising 2 children, a son and a daughter, with her husband, Felix. Tresan, welcome so much. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vassiani. I must say good afternoon to, or good morning for you, I think it is, to Mr. Gary Conville and Tony. Thank you so much for inviting me. And also want to acknowledge some of my former lecturers, including you, Lisa, one of our favorite tutors as well. I heard Professor Leah Ryan is in the audience. Hello, Prof. Hello, Professor Stewart. It feels good to be invited back home for something so noble in celebration of our former lecturer and mentor, Alison Anderson. When I think of Alison, I remember that she was not just a university lecturer. She was a mentor, a friend, and provided guidance throughout it all. As Tony said in her intervention earlier, Alison made IR come to life. And, you know, the multidisciplinary approach in which she thought of international relations forced us and compelled us to open our minds to see that even though you are living in Jamaica, a small state, you can be an influential actor. And Alison's role was really to open our minds to see how to leverage and that influence. And for that, I can say thank you, because I've built a career around that and out of that guidance and support. I remember Alison coming into a lecture and she started it by saying, in that shrill voice, Lisa, what's new? Whose world and which order? She was talking about the New World Order and the discussions around that, and how she operationalized those concepts and forced us to think about how we position ourselves and all the different theories around what was going on in the 90s in international relations at that time. It literally lit a fire in my curiosity and how I went about wanting to explore the world and figure out how I could be influential in that. But Alison also made it her duty to find out what was the spike of her students. And so though I was fixed on perhaps studying law, Alison, after I think a GT38M simulation exercise, met me outside and said, you should go into politics. You need to be talking to those politicians and you need to do negotiations well. And it was because we were looking at the negotiation cycle and how one looks at interests and how people position themselves and countries position themselves based on their interests. So it is with great pleasure that I want to congratulate the UN Women and the UWI for putting in place this proposed UN Women internship for in honor of Alison. I think any student who benefits from this can only know that it is an initiative that is in honor of someone whose shoes they are standing in, and there's an onus on them, and I'm saying it in advance, to deliver and to provide certain advocacy in the international relations space. And ensure that you know that even though you're coming from a small state, your voice is not restricted to the confines of your jurisdiction. Alison spoke about social constructivism, and I often saw her like that. She's not someone who limited herself to a particular theory and how that should define how one engaged with a particular problem. It was a multidisciplinary approach that needed to be tailored in regards to the situation or the political issue at hand. And we frequently discuss this in our simulation exercises and debates. She believed in regionalism, but she also wanted us to see how we could step outside of that regional box and position ourselves to, as times change, and as things change, how was Jamaica, how was the Caribbean positioning itself with other actors? How are we aligning with other regional institutions? These were constant debates, even outside of the classroom, that sometimes Alison and someone I heard you called Vas Lisa would have outside on the corridors of social sciences, and us curious students would sit downstairs under the tree and listen. Those things really made an impact on us. And I can say that many times when I faced crisis situations at the Commonwealth in negotiations, I've often written to Alison and said, you have no idea how some of the things we discussed, I'm relying on them right now. I remember after a very contentious elections in Lesotho, where I ended up working with the government to draft the coalition agreement for the second coalition agreement after the first collapse. And I was working with a special envoy to draft that, and we were having a very difficult negotiation between the opposition and the government. I called Alison, and Alison said, Trezan, there are people, you know. You just need to talk to them. There are people. It's about trust. We went back into the room and we did that. We hatched out a plan as to how to convince them to trust us with regards to certain paragraph. Alison understood that international relations was about building trust, which with whichever stakeholder you are dealing with. But she also emphasized that it wasn't confined to that space. International relations is multidisciplinary. So Lisa mentioned earlier that you do not have to have an international relations degree to excel in this field. I have a PhD in criminology, and I have an interest in criminal justice and the criminal justice system. And oftentimes I've relied on some of the values, the principles I've learned at UWI and through lecturers like Alison, to think about how the ecosystem is connected. International relations actually bring all of those actors and ecosystems together. So it's a discipline that really calls on you to be an eminent and excellent generalist. And in terms of my negotiation and mediation skills, I only have Alison Anderson to thank for how I've been able to really take this seriously, and for her encouragement at UWI under that tree at Social Sciences, when she encouraged me that this is a field that she saw that my spec could excel in. And I think I leave it there for now, and happy to take any questions later. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kermo. So clearly, I have seen you in action with your negotiating skills. I believe that one of the last times we saw each other in person was on a panel where Alison was also, when we were launching the Commonwealth Observation Gender Checklist. So students, you will see that what your university degree lays a good foundation for you in the academics, but there is so much work to be done afterwards in honing your skills in different areas and in gathering experience in your own country, in our region, and beyond. So I just wanted to get into some more questions with our panelists. As representative at the UN Women Multi-Country Office, Latonia, could you say what are some of the mechanisms and perhaps one of the instruments or resolutions within the UN system that we should be aware about that focus on women's issues and gender as well? Perhaps you want to speak a little about women versus gender and how these issues are important.
Sure, absolutely. Before I do that, I just also want to acknowledge Professor Bailey, Barbara Bailey, and to say, because my husband came in and said he doesn't usually do this, but he wants everyone to know that he was Alison Anderson McLean's favorite student. It's not. His name is Kashka Stevens, and he was just, wanting to also give his condolences and regards to what an amazing human being she was. So at UN Women, like any other UN organization, we're all bound by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights first. But what that declaration speaks to is a life free from discrimination. It doesn't get into some of the specific ways in which different forms of discrimination can affect different people in ways that require additional protection, whether it is sex-based or gender-based. And this is when we get into the conversation of woman versus gender. Often we use sex and gender interchangeably, and it is not something that we should do because it's a source of a lot of confusion. When we're talking about sex, we're generally talking about biology, and we can get into a whole other conversation about how many biological categorization there are for human beings. But we're talking about biology. And based on that biology, there are also a lot of different discrimination that women face, and sometimes that men face as well. So reproductive rights and anything around period poverty, those are based on sex-based discrimination. If you're looking at facts that sometimes male security guards are expected to take on responsibilities that we wouldn't expect women security guards to take on because they can use the bathroom in public, they feel, because of the different ways in which men and women can urinate. That's a different form of sex-based discrimination. When we're talking about gender, we're not only talking about the social construct around what we believe men and women should do in life and the roles that they should play. We're also talking about the ways in which historically there have been power dynamics and privileges assigned to these different roles. So for a very long time, women were not believed to be able to be leaders. Dame Billy Miller often speaks about the first time she entered Parliament in Barbados, and they had no bathroom for her to use because there was no assumption that women would be in this space. So one of the conventions that was developed to address specifically sex and gender-based discrimination is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. And it came into, and Professor Bailey was on the CEDAW committee and chair of the committee. And this came into force in 1979. And I think it's important because often when we have conversations about human rights, and I remember these conversations in GT 11A and many other classes, there were people who felt human rights is a Western concept that's being forced upon us. And what was always empowering to me, and Tressan spoke about this, was that Alison's lessons were always about centering us in these conversations. So when you look at who signed on to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, you'll see Haiti, you'll see Afghanistan, you'll see all kinds of countries that are not considered Western. You'll see a lot of our countries signing on to it early on, and not just signing on, developing the text. So human rights is not in any way a Western notion. It is a notion that all countries in the world who were independent at the time and who continue to join on to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and sign on to the UN Accords believe is something we all believe in. And it's not, in many ways, some people may think it was, I mean, I think if we were able to speak to Walter Rodney, I saw a meme today with Caribbean leaders and say, who would you speak to? Who would you want to speak to now? And Walter Rodney was one of them. But if you speak to Walter Rodney, if you speak to Marcus Garvey, if you speak to Amy Jakes Garvey, if you speak to Claudia Jones, they would probably say that the tenets and principles of human rights are actually principles that the rest of the world were practicing before we got into globalization with the West.
Thank you so much, Ms. Broadbent. I'm glad you brought up those two important instruments, and this is something we have discussed in our classes about the issue of cultural relativism, and that this is not to be used as a veil for abusing human rights. Dr. Kramer, I wanted to ask you, in your experience as negotiator, involved in elections in the Commonwealth with observation missions, what have been some of the issues in women's political leadership? Why is this important? There has been a recent discussion in Jamaica. This is an ongoing debate about how do we improve women's political participation? Is the quota system the best way to go, or do we make it happen organically? What has been your experience in this area?
Thank you, Lisa. The Commonwealth has been trying to work with our 54 member states in this area, and to that end, we have piloted a project which I lead on in Africa and also in the Caribbean. The experiences are similar in some aspects and differ in some. Whereas, for example, in the Caribbean, what we found is that only, for example, Guyana has something in its constitution and its electoral space where women are allowed to the proportional representational system are allowed a space and a track to representation as in a seat, where most of our constitutional provisions in the rest of the Caribbean are the Westminster models, is the Westminster model system, where the political party is the main gatekeeper. And so we've been trying to do a lot of work with the political party in terms of sensitizing and supporting that. Some political parties in the Caribbean region are more advanced in their capacity building where this is concerned, and recognize the strength that women's leadership can bring to the fortunes of a political party, particularly if you draw on what is sometimes seen as inherent leadership qualities and traits, sometimes when women are given further capacity building opportunities and training for their leadership. And so working with political parties so that they see that it is a mechanism, not just for a group, but it is a mechanism that serves the body politic, as it were, that serves the country. So inquiries into the affairs of a political party, including how it positions itself on issues of gender, etc., are entirely legitimate, and how being welcoming, or political party being welcoming of that, could actually redound benefits at the polling station and at the ballot box for them. Secondly, there are issues in regards to campaign financing, particularly where the issue of small states are concerned, and the Caribbean community falls within that paradigm. For example, traditionally and institutionally, it is not best practice for civil servants to also enter the political space. But what you find is that in small states, this requirement sometimes hinder excellent civil servants or talent that is identified in the civil service and would want to be transferred into the political domain. I've led a research in 2018 in the Caribbean and spoke to a number of prime ministers as to the challenges that this posed for them. And a number, for example, the Grenadian Prime Minister said, how this was a very challenging issue for him, and how he went about doing this was personally taking the responsibility to sometimes have discussion with families, because a woman would need to be assured that if she steps out of her civil servant job, she's protected and her family can be cared for, etc. And that sometimes contradicts with what is required under electoral laws in regards to campaign finance, etc., where those expectations exist, and where sometimes election observation groups would comment on the lack of campaign financing. So in that respect, I think Jamaica has made some strides in trying to at least get something on the books and move forward in terms of our campaign finance laws. So I think looking at that would also be very helpful in terms of how we move forward where that is concerned, and encouraging women's political participation, but also encouraging cultural shifts and looking at the issue of encouraging quota systems where it may be required could also be encouraged. That requires consensus discussions between sometimes, government and opposition to ensure that this legislation can pass. And this is where sometimes we find that mediation and negotiation is required, so that both sides realize that having this sort of legislation passed is in their interest. And that's probably where some work needs to be done in the international space, and in countries. In Africa, where, for example, we find that after a civil war, a country has been forced to recognize the agency of women, they have had to do this. For example, in Rwanda, and they have seen the benefits of that. So there is an intellectual argument that unless a country is forced into a position where it needs to consider all its options, then sometimes it doesn't realize the utility of the quota system unless they're forced into that situation. Countries like Sierra Leone, Rwanda has seen benefits, and Malawi, to adopting such approaches after particular periods of conflict.
Thank you, Dr. Kremer. So you have shared with us why it's important for countries to be part of international and regional organizations such as the UN, such as the Commonwealth, so we can share expertise, so we can share best practices, and not necessarily recreate the wheel when we have common experience, common capacities that we can share. Tony, I would come back to you, Ms. Broadbrook. One of the last guest talks that Alison gave at the university was to our model UN club. And one question many male students said to her was, look around. We keep hearing that University of the West Indies, we hear different figures for the proportion of male students to female students. Why are women complaining? You are at least 70% of our graduates. And she highlighted that, yes, but what percentage of what percentage of our populations actually reach university education? Why is this an important issue, the role of women in education, the proportions, access to education? Are there really disparities? Is there really a problem when at the university level women seem to be in the majority?
So, Alison was the mother of 2 amazing sons. And when I found out I was pregnant with another boy, I came to her and I was like, I was looking forward to a girl because I need somebody to take care of me when I get older. Again, gender roles that I myself have taken in. And she was like, boys are fabulous. And I used to ask her a lot of advice about how to make sure that I am being a good mother to my boys. I think that question that comes up a lot is one that misunderstands to a certain extent where privileges really lie in terms of outcome. So while you do have more women in the Caribbean in tertiary institutions than you do men, as Alison said, you have to look at what proportion of people in the Caribbean are going to tertiary level institutions. It is very, very low. It is low. It's about 5% or so the last time that I looked, but I have to go to get more updated information. The other thing is, there are very high proportions of women in tertiary institutions in Saudi Arabia and in Arab states that are a little bit more restrictive. And that's because a lot of women recognize, if I don't stay in school, I'm going to have to get married. And this is a way for them to continue to grow and expand their career. And they also see it as a safe and secure space to expand their career. When Tresan was speaking, I was thinking a lot of women go into public service and the civil service because it seems like a secure career that can help them support their families. That is difficult to leave for something that is a little bit more insecure. That's why you have women also in university, because they feel the more certification I have, the more chance I will be able to get a job. And the data says that men are still being hired with less certification than women for the same jobs in the Caribbean. In the Caribbean, men are still getting paid more than women for the same jobs. So what we need to really find out is what is the privilege that comes with a university degree? And is it conferred equally on women and men? And if it isn't, we still need to work through that. The other issue is the fields in which women are getting certification. There are a lot of very highly skilled women right now who are unemployed as a result of the impacts of COVID-19 because of the fields in which we go into generally. You're not still seeing, a colleague of mine from the International Telecommunications Union came to me to say, we need to build a pipeline of women in technology. And I was saying, what about, I said, yes, absolutely. What about men, especially because women and men are not a homogeneous group. What about lower socioeconomic income men? And he said, across the board, it's still much more men than women. And this is the growth sector right now. This is where people are going to be able to find jobs. Even in our reconstruction from COVID, construction is back on board. All of the other things that you generally find women in the majority of the sector are not moving as quickly. So I think when we talk about education, we need to be thinking about, and this is something Prof. Bailey presented recently at a CARICOM meeting we were in late February. We need to be thinking strategically about what kind of education do boys and girls need to recognize that they can excel in growth sectors in the Caribbean in ways that are breaking free from the gender stereotypes that women are in these other careers that don't require as much funding. We need to pay teachers more, for example, and those kinds of things. And men are only suited for other kind of work. We need to start breaking these barriers down. And we also need to start talking more clearly about why we are where we are in education as well. So why do we believe these things, and how can we work together to improve our countries through education and certification that delivers equally for women and men?
Thank you. We are in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic. Some research has been done on women as primary actors in the care economy, how their work is either not counted or underestimated when we look at issues of national development. What are your views on this? Do either of you want to make any comments on how things such as a pandemic may affect women and men differently? As I look on my immediate screen, it's flooded with 80% women: Keisha, Marcia, Francesca, Kayara, Amoya, Brittany, Sharon, Sandra. I see Nikolai as well, and I thank him for coming, and Javon, one of our former students. So what are the disparities? How do women factor into developmental issues, if you have any comments on this? And why should men care? Why should Javon, Nikolai, and others in this class? Why should Prof. Lewis care? Why should Dr. McAlpin care?
Go on, Tani.
Good for you to go. All right. I like how you're throwing the bus here. But I think that when we talk about gender equality issues and when we talk about the different impact that women are experiencing than men, it doesn't mean that we're not aware that men are experiencing a lot of stress and they are also requiring a lot of support. I think we often speak about, when you look at what's happening to women and when you look at what's happening to other marginalized groups, that is sometimes the canary in the coal mine to tell you something is not right with our structures and systems. So if we look, let's just go straight to the data around COVID-19 right now. What we know is that for the most part, especially in Jamaica, we know that the sectors that have been most hit by COVID-19 are sectors in which women predominate. Women are more concentrated in tourism-affected sectors, and they are also more predominant in informal activities. They are also the ones that are doing the majority of the unpaid care work. And unfortunately, when we're looking at issues of domestic violence, they're the ones that are most at risk of violence from an intimate partner. Now, as I was saying, the sectors in Jamaica, you're looking at arts, entertainment, and recreation. It's down around 28%. Accommodation and food services, we know women predominate there as well, at least 22%. And the more and more you look at how many women have lost jobs, they have lost jobs more than men, 22.5% more in the arts, 6% more in tourism, and 10.2% more in trade. And that doesn't mean that men are not suffering. It just means that if, for example, you have someone who is sick and they're bleeding out, yes, you check all of the air passage and the breathing, but you have to stop the bleeding first. And then you get to all of the rest of the issues. And so people losing jobs, people dying because of the person they chose to love is something we have to address. I do want to just flag though, Jamaica is one of the few countries in the world, at least this is what the UNODC data says, where more women die, there's more femicide, not relevant to intimate partner violence than others. So Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, and Belize have higher rates of femicide from strangers. So, and I think the news in Jamaica is demonstrating this. But when you think of COVID-19, the reason everyone should care, you know, when we talk about issues, whether it's a disability related issue or any related issue, we're part of a world. And I think this is something that Alison and Tresan spoke to it when she said, people are people, they're people, speak to them. We should be concerned with what is happening to anyone who is not being able to truly, one, fulfill their potential in Jamaica, the Caribbean, or the world, to benefit from the services that are provided by a country. If we see their inequalities, all of us should be at least concerned about what is being done. I recognize everybody can't do everything, but just to be cognizant that these issues are significant and they are affecting the country's ability to achieve any kind of sustainable development.
Thank you. Tresan?
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Tony. Just to add to what Tony has said, one other issue is looking at the digital divide that this COVID-19 situation has caused. And I'm sure it's affected even, you know, at the university. I'm sure, you know, you're working from home, etc. Now, that has an effect on the home situation that perhaps had already been prejudiced or affected by how women's roles are perceived. If the children are at home and there's an expectation as to how the monitoring of that happens and who leads or takes responsibility for that, when that woman also has to perhaps give up her career and her job or employment to focus on what's going on at home because of the COVID-19 crisis, there's a domino effect, not only in the employment sector, but also on what happens at home. And perhaps why we're also seeing an increase in domestic violence, etc. For the Commonwealth, we have recently launched, as a result of this, the Say No More campaign, where we're encouraging governments to sign up to encouraging the reduction of domestic violence and sensitizing the population around this, particularly now because we have seen an increase in issues of femicide, and also encouraging dialogue. Looking at it, if you take it down from the track one, dialogue, even as it's happening at the community level, and how that can be replicated and translated into the home scenario, where our work is now at home, and perhaps even out of the COVID situation, the work environment will also be significantly transformed? And what does that mean for the gender divide? What does that mean for employment roles and how individuals see gendered responsibilities in that context?
Okay, thank you, Tresan. So I know our students and guests and other members of the audience may have questions for you as well. So I just give you both the opportunity to make any final comments before we go to questions from the audience. Audience, you may either use the raise hand feature or type your questions or comments in the chat, please.
Lisa, I think on my part, just final for this session, one thing when Tresan, you and I were speaking earlier, that keeps resonating with me, because I was looking at my phone and I messaged Alison yesterday, a year ago, because she was on a plane going somewhere. And I was, I've been very nervous for a few days and I can't figure out what's going on. And I was looking at some of the messages and I was thinking one of the lessons learned, at least my lesson, is humanity, is how to be a full human being while doing this work and not getting caught up. It's very interesting work that we're doing, but not defining yourself by that work, because you will get very confused and it will not be a good ending. But always remembering who you are, why you are where you are, and that's because of everybody else who's around you. And that I think that's one of the key things, the humanity of the work that we do, and understanding your own humanity when trying to understand others who you may not necessarily see eye to eye with at the moment.
Tresan?
Thanks. It's similar. Alison was an authentic human being, and authenticity is so important, not only in our personal lives, but in your professional roles. And I found that has probably served me best, just sticking to who Tresan Kramer, the original Tresan Cook, is. No matter where I am in the world, nothing beats that, and people see that and appreciate that. No matter how high the ladder you climb, socially or professionally, being authentic. And in negotiation and mediation, that was something that we always discussed. You cannot build trust with individuals if you are not your own authentic self. And nobody can say that Alison Anderson McLean was not an authentic human being. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. And that's what we want, this opportunity for an internship with the UN Women to foster. We are looking for candidates who, yes, have academic excellence, but also have a yearn to serve and also have a passion for whatever area they are in. I know we have some questions. I know immediately we have Dr. Jermaine McAlpin, a colleague, a former student of Alison, wants to say some words or ask a question. In the meantime, I'll be looking in the chat for questions from the audience. Welcome, Dr. McAlpin.
Good morning. I heard all these ladies talk so fondly of Alison, and I just wanted to, it would be remiss of me not to say thank you for the comments, Mr. Cornel, Tonian, that I have some connection to you as well by way of Kashka. We are on campus together. And my dear friend Tresan, we're coming from Queens and Calabar. And my first tutor, IR tutor, Lisa Bassiani Nee Taylor, it gives me this kind of nostalgia, because though I did political science as my major, I was only short of the language requirement for the IR major. And I call Alison my matchmaker. No, she didn't set me up with my wife, but she set me up with academia. She was the one who encouraged me to teach. And so room 49 is my favorite room number. You know, that's where Tristan and I, we had Alison's tutorial for GT12A. It was
Me
also the
too.
first course we got our A's in. That's where Lisa was my first IR tutor. And would you believe it? This is why it is important to do succession planning. 10 years later, I inherited that room when I came back to UWI to teach in 2007. My office was room 49. So it's very emotional. I called her teach, and then to hear 10 years later, she was calling me teach. She had encouraged me to do academia. I've been to Armenia, I've been to Capitol Hill, and it was Alison's conversations in the 3 courses we did, GT12A, GT24A, and GT36M, foreign policy. That was Thursday morning, and Tristan and myself were in a group, and Alison, she ripped our paper to shred, and then she said, but you get an A, because we thought we were going to fail, right? She ripped it to shreds in her shrill voice. And she said, but you didn't mention Kenneth Waltz, realism, and Hedley Bull, right? And Fred Halliday. And she got me to thinking that excellence begets excellence. And when you find excellence, you reproduce it. And so I'm eternally grateful to her because of what she did. And I think this internship is important because even strong men are shaped by strong women. And so I am here to give that testimony. Wherever I go, they know that I did GT12A. I mean, I know the course code has changed and I'm dating myself. We did it January 1997. That's when we started Intro to IR.
Wow.
But those lessons from 24 years ago, I still remember. I know realism, I know neoliberalism, I know neorealism, I know all of that because of those books. You know, so I really want to say I certainly appreciate the work of UN Women, the Faculty of Social Sciences, and I just wanted to be a part of the cloud of witnesses, giving Alison her due regard. And I think it's also important that she knew this before she passed. When I went to Capitol Hill, she was the first one to come in. She said, look at me teach. And I said, I am because we are. That's what I remembered saying to her. And so she's not physically with us, but she lives on through her students and through the work that she did also at CDA, which is where I also connected with her. So I just want to say to the IR students, it is important that you follow the examples of your lecturers. You don't know where it will take you. Mine took me around the world and back, and I still come back to room 49 and Intro to IR with Alison Anderson. So thank you. I'm greatly appreciative of who she is. I taught her son, and that is also a part of the circle of life.
The circle, yes, Solomon might still be online. Thank you so much, Jermaine. You know, the 3 of us here, Tressa, Tony, and myself, were joking, and I joked with some colleagues about holding it together and not breaking down while we were reminiscing on Alison's contributions. And I'm glad you're the one who said, who mentioned being emotional and not one of us. Thank you so much. So I'm going to open the floor to questions. Our first question is from a student in Introduction to International Relations, Lisa Ferguson, one of our class reps. She says, my question is directed to Mr. Gary Conneal. Are you still there? She wants to know, I'm interested in knowing what are some of the major challenges you have faced in representing the, my chat is giving me some problem, in representing the United Nations. or if anyone else,
I
okay,
think we
right,
can wait, yeah, I think we can wait for him, because he may be
they
judging
have stepped out,
things.
right. So
Yeah.
what are some of the main challenges you have faced? We also have a question for, we spoke about global measures, but what can be done individually to improve the political involvement of women? And another, Ms. Kramer, how exactly did you transition from criminology to doing what you're doing now, aside from the direction from Ms. Anderson? A comment from Ms. Amaya Wright, another student and one of our class reps. No question here, but she definitely sounded like a breath of fresh air to everyone that came across her. She was definitely that and more, a jolt of energy and vibrancy as well. Chasine McDonald, I hope you're making notes of the questions. I know we're focusing on women, Mr. Cornel. However, I'd like to know if there are programs that empower males too. The course that Dr. McAlpin was speaking about, Intro to IR, is the current course you are doing, Gov 1008, where we have looked at theories and the UN and the international political economy. And I'll read the last question. As it relates to the level of security in Jamaica and crime management, do you think there is more that can be done to get to the point where Jamaica can effectively manage crime and violence? So I don't know. So there's one for Tresan on your transition from criminology to what you're doing now. There's a question on gender equality within the UN system and what can be done individually to improve the political involvement of women.
Thanks, Lisa. If I take the one directed to me initially, how did I transition from criminology? You see, sometimes when you are interested and authenticity is something that guides you, sometimes you don't even, the door opens for you once you are present. So it was actually, I made myself available at a discussion that the Jamaica High Commission was having. I think Minister Peter Phillips was the Minister of National Security at the time, and I was in the UK and attended an evening that he had. They were discussing the issue of women drug traffickers, and I made a couple interventions on that, and Minister Phillips and I and someone who was in charge of an NGO in the UK had a discussion after. She then contacted me to suggest that I do some work for them, and that's how I actually got into doing direct work on crime. And my PhD was on exploring the experiences of women drug traffickers in the UK, Black women drug traffickers who were imprisoned, and looking at their experiences in about 7 women's prisons in the UK and in Nigeria, Ghana, and Jamaica. But it was the negotiation during that PhD process, because you see, I had to be interacting with governments. You have to negotiate access to prison for research. And we end up, there was a discussion, an international discussion, which I think is still ongoing in Jamaica, about how to deal with the repatriation of those who are imprisoned overseas. I think there is a very high profile discussion in Jamaica now about that in terms of the building of a prison, etc. So I was involved in the negotiations regarding how that might translate in terms of an international agreement. Nigeria had given its commitment, but had not yet inked the deal and moved it forward. And then Jamaica was thinking of how not to do it. So I became involved in those negotiations. So my involvement in crime and justice was actually because of my interest in the negotiations at international level in regards to what was happening in the criminal justice space. And through that, I got involved with Amnesty International, looking at the rights of those women and how those rights were being protected. So I got involved in human rights work. And then my husband, who's also a diplomat, got posted in Israel and Bosnia, and I worked for Amnesty in that space. In working with women also who were imprisoned and being locked up in Israel, in Tel Aviv, and also with refugees in Bosnia, because you always find your space. If you are happy and you like doing something, you find your space. That's what I found has happened to me. So doors open because of your interest and your passion for it. And so I ended up working with the Commonwealth after doing some consultancy through Amnesty International, and also helping them through the negotiations of looking at refugee issues, etc. And because of my passion for this, the Secretary General deployed me on a number of occasions. Tony, I think when I visited Fiji for one negotiations, I met you there.
You and I, yeah.
Absolutely, and that was also, at that time, Tony, we didn't speak about it because I was committed to silence, but Fiji had got, there was a coup. There was a coup, and Fiji was expelled and suspended from the Commonwealth. And I supported the Deputy Secretary General's visit, and the standoff was so tense. But you know what unlocked that, Tony? I'm not sure if you know. What unlocked that was we were walking towards the elevator, and the Attorney General, the influencer at that time, he didn't want to talk to the DSG, and he said, oh, I was just coming from Cuba, and I struck up a discussion about Cuba's proximity to Jamaica and our relationship. And that evening, we got an invitation for dinner, and we were able to have certain discussions. So it is really about your authenticity, building relationships and trust, and you'll find that opportunities and spaces that you never thought of, they suddenly, you find yourself in those spaces operating.
Thank you, Miss Daisy's granddaughter. You know, I know all our participants here remembered all of those who came before them, and Tressan repeatedly speaks not just of Alison, but others who have led her. So, Tanya, there were some questions to you. One of the most recent, Ms. Broadman, how do you suggest that females who are not so techy but have an interest in tech participate in the sector of technology?
So I guess my answer to that would be, I, for example, never officially studied gender equality and women's empowerment. I studied international relations, I studied development studies, and then I did a master in business administration. But I always was interested in gender, so I would do courses where I could, and also self-taught internships. I did as much as I could to learn more about everything that I was interested in. I think that's how young women could get engaged in tech. You know, there are opportunities when you have a chance, especially free opportunities, because sometimes you can't always afford to take some of the courses, but there are wonderful organizations right now getting more women to code and girls to code. A Jamaican woman leads one of them, Caribbean Women Code. So we can share some of that information with you as well, so that you can see how you can reach out and get more information about how to engage in tech. And having more women in tech is very critical. There's a lot of interesting conversation happening now about artificial intelligence. And if you don't have diversity of perspective amongst the persons who are writing the programs, you have challenges. When we used to travel, I'm not sure if y'all remember going to the US, and I would get livid because every time someone wanted to put their hands in my hair, because my hair would consistently come up in the machine as an issue. And it wasn't because I had it in a fancy style. It didn't matter how my hair, because the people who designed the machine saw normal hair as straight and something that could easily be seen through. So they didn't create the technology to better understand how to look at more African related hair. If you had a woman and if you had a Black woman at that table, she would have been able to help them with the coding on that. I saw one other question about empowerment, and I do, Gary was here to make opening remarks. We didn't ask him to stay for the Q&A, so I'm not sure if he's here. But just to say, I think it's important for all of us to be aware what we mean when we say the words. And this is also another lesson from Alison. When we're talking empowerment, are we talking about specifically social empowerment or educational empowerment, economic empowerment, political empowerment, or psychological empowerment? Because if you break it down that way, you'll get to have a better understanding of where women and men are empowered or not in our communities. The UN has a lot of programs to support political leaders. UNDP leads parliamentary support programs. UNICEF leads a lot of programs to support educational empowerment for men and women, boys and girls, as well as our colleagues at UNESCO. The difference is we recognize when it comes to political representation, we don't have as much as we would like. And so that's where UN Women collaborates with UNICEF, not UNICEF with political participation, more UNDP, to make sure that they're building a pipeline of women leaders. But we also have a lot of programs on psychological empowerment for men and women. We had a program that was in Jamaica for some time, but it's really taken off in the Eastern Caribbean called Partnership for Peace. And that is for first-time batterers who find themselves in front of the courts for the first time in an intimate partner violence situation. They can go through a 16-week behavioral change program rather than go to jail. It's accountability as part of your punishment. And we have to also look at what whether our judicial systems are empowering. But you have that program so that men start to rethink, because regardless of what happens, and this is a lesson that the Spotlight Initiative teaches as well as our legal system, no matter what someone else does to you, you have a legal and moral responsibility if you are violent towards them. And so teaching men how to manage themselves so that their legal and moral responsibility is acknowledged and they're responsible and accountable to their own actions. And it's been very successful thus far, and we look forward to continuing that work in Jamaica.
Thank you, Tony. Tresan, yes?
Just in addition to read the question on how can we assist those who may want to take some individual actions in regards to empowerment or political representation. That's how I understood the question. And sometimes when we work in countries with political parties and with women's arms, or women who express an interest, we go down to the basics to talk about what exactly is politics and how do you understand it. There's an understanding that politics is just about raw power and having the reins of power, but it is really about how power is used to influence. Mm-hmm. So if you think about, if you're strategically positioning yourself, politics is really about how you build influence and how you use that influence. And the influence of politics is also really about the administration of good governance. So if you are able to find and leverage influence in a manner that is able to effect good governance in a number of areas, strategically, you are highly likely to be able to politically position yourself as a good political representative. And we work with women and men on a number of these areas.
Thank you, Tresan. I think we will wrap up shortly. There are some comments here as well. One that's representing Alison's Taylor Hall massive that is thanking from late night and friends, which is thanking UN Women and our faculty for this initiative. And there are some attempts to answer questions among each other. So Terry Rankin says we can help to mobilize. We can support women's political work, root for them to move to the top. We should not undervalue their political work. They often walk house to house and mobilize. They do plenty footwork. We must single them out and give them recognition, encouragement and support to take on higher representational roles. Refuse to be quick in bashing women and tearing them down. Have a commitment and around supporting women. So see, even amongst us, we, with our own individual wisdom, know what are some of the things we can do. There is one final question here, and this is directed to you, Ms. Broadbow. How is period poverty being handled by the UN?
So the UN has many different agencies. UN Women is one, and we have a great agency called UNFPA as well. And they deal with issues of women's health, and they have been supporting governments across the world to improve their legislation when it comes to sanitary napkins and provisions for women and girls. UNICEF also works closely with them on this, ensuring that schools, where possible, can provide free pads and tampons so that children and girls can use, and that does not mean they do not go to school when they are menstruating. And also the taxes that are on some of these products. That's what some of our organizations work with governments to better understand why these products should not be taxed and more expensive. So you'll see there've been some gains globally. Some countries have removed all taxes. Some countries have made them free, which is useful because this is not something that people choose. This is, again, a bodily function that happens to all women, or most women. These are some of the ways in which the UN has been working on it. And I just wanted to add, I remember Alison telling us a story, and I'm sure Tressan and Jermaine, she told you all the story too. When she, and I believe is Rasfas, she was saying, went to Oxford.
Professor Vassiani.
Yes, Professor Vassiani went to Oxford and were nervous and walked into the class nervous that they shouldn't be there. And the professor said Grenada, the coup in Grenada, or the revolution in Grenada, and not Grenada. And they started to laugh because they realized they had knowledge and they deserved to be there. And this is something Tressan demonstrated and Jermaine was speaking about. And when I went to LSE, I remember thinking, I belong here and there's knowledge I have because of where I'm from, and that knowledge is as important. And that goes to this question. It's a great answer. How can you help? You can also look to yourself and see whether you have something to contribute and whether you want to be in politics as well, because there's a space that all of us should be able to fill to ensure that we're contributing as much as we can to our communities.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Thank you, Tressan. This has really been a wonderful morning. I think there's one last comment, and then we'll wrap up. From Dawn White. Terry, we need to be reminded that the process to get into representational politics is not based on the individual woman. And she mentions that we have a patriarchal culture, so our culture needs to change its outlook on women in politics, because we still believe that men are to be the leaders. It is so sad, but this is a reality that needs to be addressed. And Ms. Mitchell says, especially looking at what I think Ms. Broadbus said, even though a lot of women are in schools, the quality and compensation given to them does not translate. If there's anyone else who would like to make any last comments or ask any questions, now is the time as we are about to wrap up. In the meantime, I'd like to thank Dr. Cornel, Dr. Kramer, Ms. Broadbow, the entire UN Women staff, Mrs. Sharon Carter Burke, our faculty representatives, Keisha Sherman Howell, Francesca Lloyd McDavid, who I have harassed for the last 3 weeks to get this going. Thank you to members of Alison's family, friends, and to the UN Women again. Thank you for being our panelists. Miss Amoya Wright, a student in the class, would like to say some words. Amoya, you can unmute yourself.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is hearing me.
Yes, we're hearing you.
Okay, so, well, that was amazing, to say the least. It was all the way amazing. I loved every minute of it. So with that being said, on behalf of all the students here, we would love to extend our thanks and gratitude to all the guest speakers, and also to Miss Alison. If it wasn't for her, I don't think any of this would be possible, because I am so out of words at how wonderful she was. And not only to the guest panels, I would love to give a big shout out and a big thanks to my lecturer, Dr. Vasiani, because I really don't know how to put it in words right now, but today wouldn't have been possible without her. It's just her coming back to us, remember to join the meet, remember to register, remember to be present. And with that, you just know that, okay, something special is going to happen on that day. And here we are today. We're so thankful that this meeting was so insightful. It was empowering. Not only was it empowering for the women here, it's also empowering for the men that are present. And none of this wouldn't be possible without Miss Alison. So thank you again for your time, everyone. A big shout out to everyone for being present. And I'll hand it over back to Dr. Vasiani. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Miss Wright. And you are absolutely correct. None of this would be possible without Alison Anderson McLean. I urge you all to look out on the faculty's social media pages and the faculty's email and the university's email for when we make the call for applications for the UN Women Alison Anderson McLean internship program. Thank you everyone for being here and making this morning's event a success. I hope you will think about all the ways in which we can develop ourselves, be more sensitive to the issues around us, and generally making the world a better place. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Cornel.
Let me also just say thank you. I really, really enjoyed this morning. It was extraordinary. We had a great time. Thank you to all of you for organizing this. I look forward to further discussions on the issue. Enjoy the rest of the day and the weekend.
Thank you. The same to you. Bye, everyone.